Abraham Lincoln. Yeah? We all know that face, right? The one on the $5 bill, with the tall hat and that super serious gaze. He's the guy who saved the Union. But what if I told you that behind that monument, there's a story that's way more complex, full of contradictions, and honestly, a lot more fascinating than the legend we all learned? Let's dive in and peel back some of those layers.
You know, this one sentence, it really captures everything we think of when we think of Lincoln. It's this incredibly powerful idea of what democracy should be. So simple, so profound. It's basically the moral bedrock of his entire legend.
And man, what a legend it is. Honest Abe, right? He's a total American icon. It's funny, today, it seems like everyone, Republicans and Democrats, they all rush to claim him as one of their own. That really cements his place as maybe the one president who seems to rise above all our political fights.
I mean, seriously, whether you're asking historians or just people on the street, his name is almost always at the top of the list for America's best president. But that's just a surface, right? That's the starting point. To really get who he was, we've got to look past that giant marble statue and see the actual flesh and blood person who had to lead this country through its absolute darkest hour.
Because here's the thing that we almost always forget. In his own time, Abraham Lincoln wasn't this universally beloved hero. Not even close. He was actually one of the most controversial, most divisive presidents in all of American history. For real.
I mean, just try to wrap your head around the sheer scale of the crisis he was dealing with. As commander-in-chief, Lincoln oversaw a war that took the lives of at least 620,000 Americans. That number is just almost impossible to imagine. His election, it literally split the country in two. And to hold the Union together, he had to take some really drastic measures. I'm talking about suspending habeas corpus. That's your basic right to challenge your own imprisonment. He started the first ever national military draft. And get this, he was so hated by so many people that he had to literally sneak into Washington, D.C. for his own inauguration just to avoid being assassinated. That does not sound like a universally loved leader, does it?
And yet, this powerful, incredibly controversial president, he came from the absolute humblest of beginnings. A friend once remembered him as just this odd and gawky kid. And there's this great description from someone who saw him, saying his clothes fit so poorly that you could often see 6 or more inches of Abe Lincoln's shin bone. Can you picture that?
His whole life story, it sounds like something out of an American myth, but it was totally real. We're talking about a guy who started in a one-room log cabin with a dirt floor on the Kentucky frontier. But he was just intellectually ravenous, you know? He would read every single book he could get his hands on, taught himself law, and somehow charted this absolutely unbelievable path all the way to the White House.
Okay, but this brings us to what is maybe the most complicated and for sure the most challenging part of Lincoln's entire story. And that is his views on slavery and racial equality. So this is the central question we have to ask, right? We all know him as the great emancipator. But was he really this unwavering champion for equality right from the get-go? Well, when you look at the historical record, it gets complicated. Just look at this contradiction. On the one hand, in 1854, Lincoln flat out says that his own feelings just won't admit of making black people politically and socially equal. But then, less than a decade later, he's the one signing the Emancipation Proclamation. For years, he fought like crazy against slavery spreading into new territories, but at the same time, he would argue that he didn't have the constitutional power to just end it where it already was. It's a real puzzle. So what you see is that his views weren't set in stone. They were absolutely evolving. You can literally trace this progression over the years. But here's the thing that's so tough about it. We're left with this huge question mark. His journey, his evolution, it was cut short by an assassin's bullet. And because of that, we'll just never really know where that journey would have taken him in the end. So, what are we supposed to take away from such a complicated figure? Well, beyond all of his actions, Lincoln left us with something else, a really powerful philosophical legacy, a whole new way of thinking about America itself. And he did this by giving us a really unique take on a very, very loaded term, American exceptionalism. Now, you've probably heard that phrase before. It's an idea that gets debated like crazy, and honestly, what it means really depends on who you're talking to. So today, you'll often hear the political right use it to mean that America is just a superior model that the rest of the world should follow. On the other hand, the political left tends to see it as a kind of arrogance, a word used to justify some pretty questionable economic or military actions abroad. But Lincoln gave us a third way. For him, American exceptionalism wasn't about saying we're perfect, not at all. It was about recognizing that we have this profound, never-ending, and totally unfinished obligation to our ideals.
And you can see this idea captured perfectly in his most famous speech, the Gettysburg Address. He's not there to celebrate some finished victory. No. He calls on everyone living to dedicate themselves to the, quote, unfinished work. He's talking about the constant, ongoing struggle to actually live up to the ideals this nation was founded on.
So, when you boil it all down, Lincoln's real legacy isn't this claim that America was born perfect. It's a challenge. It's a challenge to all of us to define our nation by its constant, its difficult, and its absolutely essential struggle toward that self-evident truth, that all people are created equal. And that's a job that's never, ever finished.
Lincoln's own evolution was cut short. His work was left unfinished. And that leaves us with a question that echoes all the way from his time straight to ours. Is our work unfinished, too?